Well, we made it. Sort of. We have one more episode after this one where Ashley and I get to wrap up. But welcome to episode 9 of season 2 of Hybrid Disciple. Man, I don't know what else to say that I haven't said already. The superlatives just keep rolling out of my lexicon about all of these guests that we talk about. But this one in particular, Kels Johnson, is this interview is one that I'm really glad that we saved until last. Not because the rest of our guests this season have been bad, far from it. In fact, every single one of them has been just dropping truth bomb after truth bomb. Thank you to everybody that's watching and listening and sharing and doing all the things as well. Our views are like going up and to the right. Our engagement is going up and to the right. And that's all we can ask for. And we just ask that you keep sharing and keep commenting on everything that you're seeing and, you know, doing the thing because we need you to do the thing because this is a message that actually needs to get out there. And today, Kels Johnson from Atlanta, the Atlanta area, and I'll let him get a little bit more into kind of his everything and his kind of next movement and the way that God has been moving him and where he's actually going and all the things. But I tell you what, this episode is the most that I've laughed, and I think the most that Ashley has laughed. There is some truth bombs, there's some jokes, there's just a grand old time here with Kels, and I don't want to spoil anything, but I do have to say that the way Kels looks at social media, the way he looks at TikTok, and the way he looks at discipleship found, in-person discipleship that is found in kind of the midst of all of that is great. I encourage you to go give him a follow on all of his platforms. Man, he is a great follow. He's an in-person pastor. He's doing some kind of professorial and teaching work. The guy is just lighting up the social media game. So I got to stop talking. You need to get to this episode. Here we go. Episode 9 of season 2 of Hybrid Disciple. Ashley and I have been on a run of interviews. I think with our last guest, she equated us like cramming an entire season's worth of interviews into 2 weeks. And each one of them have had amazingly awesome stories and amazingly awesome things. And this guy is no different. Kels Johnson joining us you're in Atlanta, right?
Yeah, in Atlanta.
Okay. I used to live in Atlanta. What part of Atlanta do you live in?
So my wife and I are in Hapeville.
Okay.
Hape. And I have to spell it because normally people hear like, you're in Hapeville?
Hapeville, yeah.
Good
That's
Lord.
where I live, Hapeville.
So fun fact, Hapeville is where the original Chick-fil-A is.
I
So
know.
the original Chick-fil-A is not even 30 seconds away from my house. And our view is of the Porsche racetrack. And if you remember back in Avengers, the first one, their headquarters, Porsche actually made that into a hotel. So that's right in front of my view. So it's just really cool.
Brother, you are speaking my language. So I lived north. My wife is born and raised in Kennesaw. I was a worship pastor up in like the Ackworth, Kennesaw, Marietta area. But I'm in Tampa now, and my family, I was driving back and forth. My mom had breast cancer. Unfortunately, she passed away from breast cancer. And so I was driving back and forth a lot from Atlanta and then just doing the whole thing. And so I would pass that Porsche facility every single time and just be like, dang, I got to get over there, man. That place looks freaking dope. And then my son, he's like a car nut. And so he's like, hey, Dad, can we, what do you think about that? It's like, listen, I don't know if you knew this. I'm a pastor. I don't have like Porsche money.
And then it's the racetrack. The sign is literally right outside this window to my left. So yeah, it's incredible. I love it.
I'm jealous. All right, Kels, from Story Church Atlanta and River House and everything there. Ashley, how did you get introduced to Kels?
So the web. So I work with Cherie Rivera. Well, Cherie Danielle now. She is a creative genius and owns a company called 4,000 More Creative. And through 4,000 More Creative, she's actually who knows Kels, but she and I were on staff together at a church in Detroit. She now lives in LA, but she and I work with Reimagine in Atlanta, which is an amazing organization that equips young, multi-ethnic, multiracial storytellers to learn anything that you could ever want to know about filmmaking and cinematography and lighting and gaffing and da-da-da. And so through that, we launched a cohort last year where I teach young people how to do social media as a career, and it has gone exceptionally well and all of that. But when we were first stepping into that, we weren't 100% sure how much in-person contact we were going to need with these young people. And so initially, Kels and I met because we had tossed around the idea of him potentially being like our boots on the ground person in that initiative. That didn't actually end up happening, but that's how we met. And then I continued following him, and then following the way that Kels creates content is beautiful. And as a content creator myself, and as somebody who teaches people how to create content, like his content is consistently a place that I direct people, like, go look this, go watch this. Like, Kels doesn't know this, but Kels and my really good friend Romel Freeman, who lives here in Phoenix, way that they just present their visual story, I'm like, that is it. And I have told Andy before, my friend Romel, if he likes one of my pieces of content, I don't even care if the rest of the world likes it. Like, I'm good. Like, nobody else like it. I don't even care if anyone else sees it. That's not true.
Yes.
But you know what I mean? Like, I'm just like, check, I'm done for today, and go take a nap. But Kels definitely is one of those people. But then additionally, so that's how we met. But then from the perspective of just operating in the digital space and having really impactful things to say in concise ways, Kels is great at that. And also, he walks very much like I do, or you do, or a bunch of people who listen to this podcast do, with feet in two worlds. So you have one foot in the brick and mortar, like in-person space, and one foot very firmly planted in the digital space. And really, Kels, kind of what we talk a lot about on this podcast is how to bridge that gap between the digital and the physical, because we, good, bad, or otherwise, I'm not always sure we're the best choices for this advice, but people come to us consistently and say, well, how do you do that? You know, how do you operate fully and functionally in the digital space impactfully, where you're causing people to question, think, and want to know more about God and Christ, and then have that translate over into the in-person space? So that's how I know him. And then I've been stalking him about this podcast. So thank you.
So all the glowing introduction aside, now that Kels is blushing over there, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see him a pretty shade of blush. Kels, tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of how you got involved in both the physical and the digital, and like why your Instagram is so awesome, and why you are one of the people that are constantly coming up on my Instagram algorithm, just because I'm like just in awe, and it's like it can tell that I'm like watching you the whole time. And Ashley actually introduced to me, and I was like, this guy, he's blowing me away. So we're done flattering. Like, tell us how you got to where you are.
First of all, thank you so much, Andy and Ashley, for having me on the podcast. I'm super excited. I love having creative conversations, especially centered around the gospel and how the church can start to mobilize the gospel through creative ways. I almost went to go look myself up after hearing you guys talk about my social media, because, man, I think oftentimes it's the curse of the creative to create and then move on. And for me, I'm a cantankerer. Like, I'm always trying to do something better. So it doesn't matter what I put out. As soon as I put it out, I feel like it sucked. It's like, oh, that's terrible. Like, I could have done this and done that. But man, I'm third generation pastor. I'm 7 years married. Me and my wife have been doing ministry since, our inception. This is just what I do. I'm a church kid. And I'm a church kid because as a kid, I had a drug problem. And the drug problem was very bad. My parents drugged me to every church service that they could think of. So that's how much of a church kid.
But ching.
There it is. I was drugged to every service.
Yeah.
So all I know is church. And I have been literally, before it was the digital space, it was just my imaginary space. I would always have church services going on in my head. I would sit the stuffed animals up. I would preach from an ironing board. Like, I have been doing things outside of the four walls of church that look like church for so long that by the time the pandemic hit, everybody was panicking. Like, how are we going to preach in a room to nobody? And I don't know how this feels. I'm like, I've been doing this since I was a kid. Like, this is easy. And so it was literally a God thing that I even got into it. I had no desire to get into photography, videography, graphic design. I was an artist, a music artist, and I didn't have the money to pay anybody. So I learned how to do graphic design. I learned how to take my own pictures. I learned how to shoot my own videos. And then, like, before the whole craze of like, I want to get online and say this motivational thing, man, I was doing it. And it was like nobody was in the space. I used to call it Monday Minutes. And I would get on. This is when Instagram only had 60-second videos. And I would have to figure out how to say what I needed to say in 60 seconds. And it really helped me to sharpen my tools. And then I just started to see how, like, social media has such a hold on this generation that I felt like if the church neglected this, we would lose a generation. Like, if we neglect this moment, we are going to be so far out of rhythm with what's going on in the culture that it's just going to take us way too long to catch up. So that's where I'll start. That's how I got into it. I saw what it was doing to our generation. I was like, hey, the gospel needs to be here.
Mm-hmm. We talk a lot about, I work with UIWI in California. They're one of my clients. And we talk a lot about how the mass exodus of young millennials and Gen Z from traditional church settings, but also how the church tends to be very reactive instead of proactive. So what will happen is it's kind of like one of the greatest examples of this is I am a total like 90s hip hop kid. Okay. Like West Coast hip hop, like all day long. I love it. Like, that's my thing. But when it came out, so I graduated high school in 1998. So like, that's arguably like the golden era of hip hop. Some people would say that's not true, but I will fight you. So
okay. I'll concede to some of that. I think we might have to go a little bit into the 2000s, but
maybe I'll 2002. I'm not going past that, but that's a different.
I think you gotta go to 2008 because Lil Wayne, 2008 was unstoppable.
He's bringing Atlanta.
I can give you.
He's bringing Atlanta in.
I can give you that. I can give you Lil Wayne. So can we do 2002 plus Lil Wayne? Like, can we do that?
There we go.
Well, you got Kanye. You had Mos Def. You had Common. Like,
it was just Mos Def, but I would argue only
Andre 3000.
Okay. That we're gonna
after 2008, it was dead.
It turned into mumble.
That was prime Kanye. Like, it was crazy.
Kanye only has one good album, and I said what I said. I said what I said.
College Dropout.
That's the only one. That's the only one.
That's great.
Only College Dropout. I care less about
Heartbreaks at 808 was the most game-changing album.
I just don't like it. But anyway.
Interview over?
We have to have that conversation on a different podcast.
We have to talk about Jesus. We're talking about Jesus. Right now I'm hearing blasphemy.
Yes. Oh my. And now we see, ladies and gentlemen, how splits in the church begin.
Oh, this is it right here. It's over hip hop.
Precisely.
It's the argument of the rap era, and now we have two different denominations.
Well, the church split. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, there it is.
There it is. But what would happen from a proactive to reactive standpoint is whatever your era is, like in probably 1996, then you started getting like a dabbling of Christian rap music.
Mm-hmm.
And with few exceptions, most of it was cheesy and corny and horrible.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of the church being like proactive and like paying attention to what was needed in that generation musically and having people step in and actually come to the table with something that was amazing, which could have been done because we all know that the capital C church has plenty of money to do things well if they choose to.
100%.
That wasn't happening. And so then Christian rap got a really bad name because instead of being proactive, we were reactive. We just knew we needed to be in that space somehow. And so now we've done something halfway and we don't know what's happening and we don't understand it. And I feel like we're in that same space whenever it comes to social media specifically and almost digital presence in general. Like the pandemic definitely showed us like we have to be in this space. We have no choice. Like we've got to be there. But to your point, a lot of what is happening, I think, in the digital space in many circles is very reactive. It's not proactive. 100%. And as we step into like Andy's church now, it's a gamer church by gamers for gamers, and they're on platforms that I think a lot of churches have never even heard of ever. And then as new things come to the table, like TikTok, for instance, for the longest time, everyone thought it was just a dance app. So there weren't really any solid Christian voices. Like it's all lip syncing and dancing. And so to your point, I think that you're 100% spot on with that, not your hip hop assessment of Kanye, but with the digital, with the digital content, I think that the church really needs to be more proactive in that space. So with that in mind, because you do pastor at a brick and mortar church as well, if other church pastors were to come to you that had no presence digitally whatsoever, what would your advice be to them?
Do you believe the Great Commission? If you believe it, you've got to be in the digital space. And there is no way that you will accomplish the Great Commission without being in the digital space. I believe that this is also the space in which is a part of Jesus saying, and greater will you do. Jesus could only go to so many people because he was traveling by foot. So he had a set amount of people that he was trying to get to, and he knew what he wanted to do. But he's like, y'all going to do greater because there's going to be more of you. And then once the era shifts, there's not just going to be more of you, but there's going to be you having more access to more people. And so if you don't get into this space, you are kind of like shooting yourself in the foot. Now, the problem comes when you give people more access, there's more access for counterfeit to slip in. And so most people don't realize that maybe you don't need to be in the space because you were not called to the space, right? And so I do think that there is a delicate dance of those who are called to a space are the ones who should occupy the space, because once you start producing in mass, there is a hit in quality, and you cannot control quality. If you just got this big influx of everybody feeling like because I've got a podcast mic and my iPhone shoots in 4K, then I need to be saying something about the gospel. It's like, well, your faith hasn't even been tried yet. What you believe hasn't even really been tested yet. You are just saying something that feels, it's what happened with the Christian rap. It's cheesy now. Like right now, there's a bunch of cheesy people just, hey, God loves you. I mean, that's cool. Yeah, he does. But there's more. Don't just stay surface because you want to get the clicks or the likes, or you just want it to go viral. Like, no, get to the depths of who God is. And let's talk about that, because that's what our generation needs. We don't need the fluff. Give me the meat of what God is saying.
Absolutely. Your point to the Great Commission. So whenever I launched 12 Church, the concept behind it is we target the 12 largest cities in the US through search engine optimization. And the reason for that, people are like, well, is it because of 12 disciples? And I'm like, no, there's actually zero symbolism behind the name 12 at all, other than it's the 12 largest cities in the US. But the reason that I feel like God put that on my heart is whenever I was a little kid, there was an evangelist that came to our church, and he prophesied over me that I would take the gospel to every nation, but I wouldn't use my feet. And whenever I started studying the demographics, because I am a data nerd, when I started studying the demographics of the 12 largest cities in the United States every single people group on earth is represented in inner city communities in the 12 largest cities in the United States. So in order to complete the Great Commission, if you target urban centers in those 12 cities, every nation on earth should be able to hear the gospel. Now, obviously, there's like intricacies in that and language, but that was really the concept behind it. And I never really understood the whole you'll reach the entire world with the gospel, but without using your feet. Because when I was 10 years old, the internet wasn't a thing. It was about to be a thing, but it didn't exist yet. And so it was interesting how full circle that came. But to your point, I genuinely believe that young people really want like the meat and potatoes version of God, not the like Chinese fast food version of God, where you eat it and you're hungry again in a little while.
100%.
And as I put content out specifically on TikTok, because that's kind of my lane, like I spend the most time in that space digitally. The things that perform well are actually things that conceptually a lot of people would say that's just too theologically deep for just like a rando person that happens upon it on the internet. And those are actually the things that really seem to like draw people in and get them thinking and following and wanting to continue to engage in the conversation. How do you determine what you're going to talk about? Like, is it like God just one day and you're like, I think I'm going to talk about this randomly, or is it something you plan out in mass?
It's more random than it is planned. My gifting is heavy in the prophetic. And so it just hits me whenever it does, and I'll go. And sometimes it's not until I sit down. It's like, okay, here we go. Like, spontaneity is my superpower. And so I definitely like to just say, God, what do you want to say right now? Because that's the most accurate thing that I could say. If I tried to give my own philosophies, it wouldn't hit the same. So it's like, God, what are you saying? Because I feel like he's always talking. And I feel like he's always talking because he doesn't have to talk anymore. Why am I saying that? I feel like, and based off of my theological, disposition, we live in the rewind of God. So he's currently not doing anything right now. He's sitting down. Everything he was going to do, he's already done it. So all you have to do now is listen for what he's already done. If you listen to what he's already done, you're in the flow of what he already mapped out for you. And so I'm just like, God, what are you saying? What have you already said? All right, let me repeat that. And then it resonates with the people that need to hear it because it was for that designated time. And if I say anything outside of what he designated for that time, then I'm out of order.
That is a mind-bending way of looking at it, actually. Now that I'm like doing, what's the meme with the lady from whatever that show is with all the math that's happening around here? Like, I'm doing one of those things right now.
Yes.
So Ashley, just to kind of ask you about like the things that you're talking about and the way that you're looking at that, in particular, like what is the target that you seem to be reaching? Or do you have a specific target of people that you're actually trying to reach in all of this?
I don't have a target. And some would say that's probably the worst thing you could have done. You need to niche down and have a topic. Like I don't. I just feel, here's how I feel. If I'm listening to the voice of the Lord, my only concern is his sheep knowing his voice. If they hear my voice, they'll stray. But if I'm saying whatever he wants to say, whoever needs to hear it in that moment is going to hear it. So I don't have a target audience. My target audience is whoever needs to hear the gospel at that current moment. And I just say whatever he tells me to say, and I put it out. And some videos do better than others. Some get a lot of engagement than others. But I know that the ones that saw it at that particular moment, they are the ones that needed to see it.
Yeah, there's definitely a mindset that has to happen. My dad actually was the one who pointed this out to me. I had seen, I'm like one of those random weirdos that like my first 10 videos on TikTok, probably 20 videos on TikTok just went berserk, like nutso. And then like leveled out, and we're still consistently getting, 6,000, 7,000 views with like a 20% engagement rate, like super solid metrics, especially for like a baby creator, right? A baby TikTok person. And I was complaining to my dad, who's the most level-headed person that I know. And he's like, I'm saying like, wow, this really, I'm really sad because it's like, oh, this one only got 8,000 views and la la la. And he looked at me and he goes, Ashley, I want you to pause for a second and purposefully envision standing in front of 8,000 people.
That's it.
He's like, that's like, they live in a college town. He's like, that's like the basketball arena.
Yeah.
He's like, that's like you preaching in front of a basketball arena full of people. And I was like, he said, would you be complaining if you had gone to preach at a basketball arena that was packed out and say, well, it wasn't really that big of a deal because it was only 8,000 people? And I was like, well, no. And he said, and what about 500 people? He's like, most church services packed out don't even have that. And he's like, there are people who pastor churches that consistently only have 20 people in the audience. Are you saying that what they do isn't valid or important because the number isn't as big? And he's like, but you literally stand in front of hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands and thousands of people every single day, and you have the audacity to complain that it's only 8,000 people. Like after that, it was like a shift. So have you had any, over the course of your creating, and just even, it doesn't even have to be digitally, but as you have been ministering to people, have you had moments like that where like God has had to bring you back into perspective and be like, maybe you should think about this in a different way?
I'm one of those people that didn't have to have one of those moments because I walked in with that idea. Like, if 1,000 people showed up in a room, I would be ecstatic. I would be excited about it. But the fact that we don't get to tangibly see that can be the downfall of our motivation to continue. Now, I cannot say that I don't get frustrated at times because my frustration comes from a quality perspective, not a quantity perspective. I feel like social media rewards low quality so much. I'm like, do you see what I'm investing into putting this out? Like, at least give me 30% of my followers to be able to see this. I would be fine. So it's not necessarily a quantity perspective. I just get upset because I'm like, I go in on my videos. And my philosophy about that, we could talk about that later. But I walked in saying, God, if you just give me one person that I can legit have an impact on their life, I'm okay. I'm fine. I actually had a singing group. I had a singing group when I was coming up, and I named the group AO1, Audience of One, which meant it didn't matter how many people were in the room. We were there for the audience of one, which is God. Like, if we please you, if we make you smile, if you are pleased with our offering, that's it. Everybody else can give us the applause, and that's maybe just a cherry on top. But you are the main focus of the thing. And so I took that same principle into content creating. It's like, listen, if it's one person or 1,000 people, if I can make an impact, it was worth it.
Absolutely.
You just mentioned philosophy of going in on videos, and I want to dig a little deeper into that. So what is the philosophy? What is the mindset when you're creating? And also, your social media seems to be split right now between two different things. You've got your main page, and then you've got Riverhouse. And like, I want to know the split in your own head that way.
Yes. So first one, philosophy. So River. It's the River Network, and then the creative side of it is just called the River House. That's where we create everything. But the River is it's a content distribution platform that we are launching and getting ready to hopefully bring to the rest of the world. And our one of our thoughts at River is we want to share the beauty of the gospel through the lens of humanity. And I believe that we have the greatest story ever told. The gospel is the greatest story ever told. It's the greatest drama. It's the greatest love story. It's the greatest action movie. It's the great, like, suspense. Like, it is the greatest. It encompasses everything that we love about a good movie. Yet the church sucks at telling it sometimes. Like, it can get very terrible. How we feel about what happened with Christian rappers happens everywhere in Christendom. The movies get cheesy. The music gets cheesy. Some of the fashion gets cheesy. And it's like, guys, what are we doing? We serve the creator of the universe.
The ultimate creator, yes.
The ultimate. I say it like this: creation was created by the creator of creativity. If we are not creating at an optimum level, I think we're doing God a disservice, because he gave us all of this ability and power to create something from nothing. Like, what are we doing? And this is what we come with. And so for me, I'm like, no, we just suck at telling it. And I feel like God has given me a creative eye to help to tell the story or share the gospel or create a podcast or create environments and spaces and atmospheres where people can encounter a tangible sense of the presence of God and say, I need more of that. If I can get you to say that, I've got you. I've won. Like, that's the goal. And so that's why we exist. The split in my mind isn't necessarily a split. It's just River House is just kind of like the creative side. That there'll be some more people that will be involved on that side, and then my personal page is just it's my as the fashion world would say, it's my digital atelier. So it's my workspace. I get to just experiment on my main page and hopefully make it look as good as possible. And then over there, like, I really want it to be very streamlined. And the philosophy behind River is we are a digital space with a fashion house approach. Like, just the way that they move in seasons and times and storytelling, and very streamlined. There's nothing random about what they're doing. They take it's very meticulous. That's how I want to be with the digital content that we're producing out. Everything needs to have a feel. Everything needs to have a look. Why? Because I'm trying to pull you into the story with the entire presentation.
Do you ever feel, last quick question on that. Do you ever feel like you need to pull yourself back from losing the forest for the trees? Do you ever feel like you have to guard your own heart against creating for creativity's sake and creating for the art's sake versus creating for getting a message of the greatest story ever told? Do you have that battle inside of you? I know I do. Like, I'm a musician, and like I said, I was a worship pastor for 10 years, and I'd go and write music, and still writing music. And then I will occasionally have to step back and go, man, I just wrote this really, like, that was whatever I just did, it was slapping, but like, I don't necessarily know that's going to point people to God. Do you ever have that wrestle in your heart?
No, I don't. I don't.
Dang.
I feel like my greatest gift to God is presenting the very best that I can give him. Sure. You look at Solomon's temple, and the Queen of Sheba comes and says, what the heck is this? And and she tells him, I need whatever you're doing, I need to take it back home. So if I can get so caught up in the creative process and saying, God, I'm going to exhaust all of my energy on this particular thing, just so one person can look at it and be like, I need to take this back home. It was worth it. It's like, I want to leave empty. And the problem is, the more I pour, the more he pours back. And so it's just never like this thing of like, well, man, I feel like people are looking at me. Maybe they are, but hopefully my life is being lived in such a way that it is a direct reflection of what God is doing. Like, I've got to point it back to him. It doesn't, if I make myself low, then what does that say to the person that needs a big God? They're gonna be like, well, his God ain't doing nothing. Look at him. Like, he's no better than me. Like, no, like I want to live a big life. I want to create big things because I want to be like, hey, listen, this is what God does. He does incredible things, and you can do it too.
I think one of the cool things about, so the staff that Cherie and I were both on in Detroit, I grew up in a super old school, wooden pews, green hymn book, like cross on the pulpit, brick and mortar church. Like that's the environment that I grew up in. Then me and God had a major falling out. I came back to God when I was 34, moved to Detroit because God told me to move to Detroit, which is random and bizarro. Ended up at this church called Detroit Church. And Pastor Sonny toured. This is just, we can call this the rap episode. He toured as a Christian rapper across the country. He's actually a phenomenal rapper. Is on the, if you watch 8 Mile, the rap battle scenes, my pastor's on the row of that, watching that.
Come on.
He's there. You can see him. He's like very hyped into the whole thing. But
yeah.
Detroit Church, I started there like their second week of in-person, like actual services. And I walked in and they had all of these very beautiful, giant, artistic pictures of all kinds of people, multiple races, ethnicities, criminals, actors. I mean, like, it was just like this bizarre mix of like these really beautiful portraits of people. And they're just giant stretch canvas on easels. And I walked in and it was in like this school auditorium because they still don't have a building. Like they move all over the place because they feel like they can reach. That's why it's called Detroit Church. Like they can reach more people by being in multiple places.
That's amazing.
And that was the first time ever that I had encountered a truly creative leader, because Pastor Sonny is like, he is a digital artist by profession and he was a rapper, like, and everything he put out challenged the traditionalism of how I saw church in every way. Like he would put out a sermon series graphic, you know, and I'm like, as a graphic designer, I'm like, this is dope. As a church kid, I'm like, Jesus is not okay with this. And I had to like wrestle with that like hyper traditionalism but what it opened me up to is, like I say all the time, like 12, if you look at 12's Instagram page, that is how I see the world. Like you're literally stepping into my head whenever you go onto 12 Church's Instagram page. I take all the pictures, I make all the videos, all of the things. But if I hadn't worked with Pastor Sonny and experienced that, 12 would not exist, because I wouldn't think that God would be okay with me presenting the gospel to the world through that like grimy alleyway lens.
That is what's so interesting about religion is it teaches you less and less about Jesus. Because the actual factual reality of it is Jesus was the most challenging person to walk the planet. That's why they killed him. They killed him because he challenged all of their religious systems. And you're saying, well, I don't know if God would be pleased with showing the grimy. Where do we think Jesus was? He wasn't in the temples and the synagogues. He was healing people at the well. He was healing people in the house where the roof had just caved in. He was with the grime. Like Jesus was not in this palace and sitting up pristine. Like he was in with the people. And what did he do? Creative miracles. None of the miracles existed before he did it. He literally, everything he did was creative. Go show yourself to the priest. Go dip yourself 7 times. Put this clay on your eyes. Spit right here. Like everything that he did was so creative. So I would dare say creativity is one of the premier characteristics of Jesus. And we have, if we're going to be Christians, Christ-like, we have to tap into the creative character of God and say, what should we be doing? What should we be saying? And so, yeah, I'm glad you got a revelation of, no, that's what they're doing actually isn't right.
Absolutely. 100%. I would say that from a ministry perspective, there's also identity that can only come through identifying a person, like specific piece of art, right? So like one of my favorite artists is MC Escher. Do you know who that is?
No.
So he was usually high on opioids. He was a little cuckoo. He's like the guy, the famous picture of hands drawing hands.
Stairs going upstairs and going downstairs.
The stairs that like go up.
Yeah.
So in order to conceptualize that, you know, like who knows where his head had to be. But like that's my favorite artist. Well, Andy might love Monet and have tulips all over his house. And neither one of them is bad or wrong, you know. But it's kind of like, I think that the reason why it's so important as pastors and as ministries to fully step into whatever creative vision that God is pouring into your heart, even if it's less or completely non-traditional vision, is because I may see the gospel more clearly in a Monet creation, or I may see the gospel more clearly in a Escher creation. But if we all ascribe to a Da Vinci creation, then we're missing the Michelangelos and the, you know, Van Goghs and the people who see themselves in that type of art. How would you advise pastors or nonprofits or whatever to find and really tap into what their art looks like if they in fact don't know or may not consider themselves to be creative?
Oh, that's perfect. So I've got two answers. Answer number one, everybody walking the face of the planet is creative. Everybody. It doesn't matter how administrative you are a creative. Here's how I know, because you had to create a system to be administrative. A creative, a traditionalist creative could not walk into your situation and do what you do. You created that. You saw, you felt something that said, this is probably how we should do this. This is probably what we should be looking at. You are a creative. The problem is we don't stay in our lanes. Mm-hmm. And then we demonize the other side. So it's like the extreme creative, like artistic creative is like, oh man, I just want to be free. I don't want to have any structure. Well, then that's crazy because you're going to run your life in the ground. And then the other side is, oh, we need all structure, no creativity, no life. And it's like, well, that's creative because then it's going to be boring and nobody's going to want to do that for a long period of time. So both need to be together. Here's what I always say. Jesus was a walking and, lion and lamb, God and man, Alpha and Omega. He's all of it. And if you tap into who God is, the first thing he'll teach you is you don't need to do it alone. So whatever you're lacking creatively, you need to find somebody that has mastered the thing that you're lacking and then push them to their fullest capacity and say, what is God saying to you? And trust that what God is saying to them is probably the direction that you need to go. Vice versa. If you're saying this is what God is saying to me, trust that God has probably already dealt with them about the budget and saying, this is probably how we can get it done the best ways possible. And then the two of you collaborate and say, God, we're going to come together, but you're going to be the third party that breathes on everything. So know what you're good at and bad at, and then staff out the things that you're bad at and just allow them to run. Don't muzzle each other's creativity.
When you are thinking about leading people, mentoring people, kind of raising up people, doing the pastor thing, because that's what we do as pastors. We are constantly forward thinking, not only about our own creativity and our own things, but we're thinking about next generations. We're thinking about literally how to apply God's word to people that are coming up behind us, getting the dust of the rabbi on us, essentially, and getting that dust all over everybody else as well. How, when you are going through that process, take me through a couple of the steps. Take me through some of the things that you're thinking of, especially as you're teaching and leading. Like, what are the core things that you're trying to pull somebody through?
Whew. Again, I'm going to sound like a broken record. What is God telling you? Hmm. Too often we get caught up in the philosophies of men, that we miss the voice of the Lord. And you don't know what the Lord is telling you until you are in a position to where you actually have to listen. And that is the voice I want people to get most acquainted with. And and I say this analogy, there's a difference between a good idea and a God idea. And most people get caught in the tension of those two, and that's where they don't know where the voice of the Lord is. It's not that they don't know what Satan sounds like. Yeah, if it's crazy, that's probably the enemy. Like if it's, you go kill that guy. No, that's not God at all. Don't do that. But the difference between a good idea and a God idea is the good idea is always trying to do something extra. Then God has already told them. Let's spell the word G-O-D, G-O-O-D. That extra little O is where we get in trouble, because that's where our logic tries to come in. That's where our reasoning tries to come in, because God has already told us something. And we're like, well, actually, this might be a good idea if I do it this way. Your logic has just kicked in. Now, I'm not saying don't use wisdom, don't use counsel, but your logic on its own is probably like, well, if that ain't what God said to do, like you need to do what God says to do. And so I want people to find out what the voice of the Lord sounds like for them. Sometimes he talks. Sometimes he'll give you wise counsel. Sometimes he'll give you a dream or a vision. And the best way to do it is to ask, if I do this, who's going to get glory? It's the best way to find out what the voice of the Lord is for you. If I do this, who's going to get glory? It's not about what you say. It's about who gets glory when you say it. Can I give you an example?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Lazarus dies. Mary and Martha say the exact same phrase to Jesus, both of them. If you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. They both said the same thing according to scripture. Why was Mary the only one to get an actual answer from Jesus versus Martha getting a response from Jesus? Martha runs to Jesus toe to toe, face to face. If you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. But you know what? I guess he'll get up in the resurrection. Jesus responds to her, woman, I am the resurrection. You're waiting on an event when you're looking at the person. Mary runs to him, gets at his feet, and says, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. But I know, like, you can resurrect him again. Jesus gives her an answer and says, show me where you laid him. Who got glory? Martha wanted to get glory out of checking Jesus, saying, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Mary got into his presence and say, listen, I don't get no glory. You're the one that can change any situation. So as I'm mentoring people, who's going to get glory? Check your responses. Figure out the voice of God. Get you godly counsel. Do not do things in a silo, because that's where the enemy works. Get godly counsel so they can help you to discern what's the good idea versus what's the God idea. And then you apply that to your creativity. You apply that to your business. You apply that to your marriage, your friendships. Like, it just spills over into every area of your life. And, you know, for me, like, if God tells me something, hopefully I give you exactly what God tells me, but don't just take my word at it. Go to God, because he's the source.
Yeah, that's good. I don't even know if we need to say anything else.
Again, that's like two guests in a row that have just kind of like done mic drop moments for me. Like, I don't know, man. Like, you kind of completed the whole thing. I guess my last big question for you, Kels, is like looking into 2024 and kind of looking into the future. Like, what's on the horizon for you? Where are you steering things? Where are you feeling God's moving you? All of those kind of steps you're taking.
Man, that's a great question. I feel like God is taking me he's taking me into university training, like in my own personal life. I'm not going to a university, but he's taking me through university training, university level training, because of what I feel like he wants to do in the future. So we're actually getting ready to move from Atlanta. Probably by the time this podcast comes out, we will not be in Atlanta anymore. We're moving to Baltimore to join up, with a pastor friend of mine, Union Church, and just kind of learning what it means to actually plant a healthy church and run healthy systems and have healthy culture. Because what God has, like, I need to know how to do. Again, I'm creative. I can do that in my sleep. But if God says, hey, I need you to do this, that's not necessarily my strongest suit. And you can't necessarily run an organization just being all creative but no structure, all creative but no systems, all creative but no like something to actually hold the creativity in. And so God is literally taking me through university level training, my in finances, in my marriage, in church. Like he's just like, no, let me teach you some things real quick, because for the next seasons, you're gonna need to go in equipped. So that's what 2024 is looking like for me. I'm back in school.
That's amazing.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's really good.
Well, I don't think I have any more questions. I feel like you're, as with probably every guest, we've been so fortunate with the people that have agreed to come on this season. I feel like with every guest, I could probably sit down and have like a 3-hour conversation and like consistently get like more and more and more. I will say everything that you just said. I think that this podcast episode was actually just God preaching at me, because 12 we're shifting. And whenever God originally downloaded in my mind, he said very specifically, this is what it's supposed to be. And I was like, that is way too much. And I think that this would be a better version, not a better version, an easier for Ashley version.
Mm-hmm. It was a good idea.
Just, like it's a good idea if we shift. And in the last couple of months, it's really supposed to be about highlighting multiple voices and elevating the works that other people are doing and using my skill set to highlight their skill set and finding those partners and working all of that out. I'm like, this is really a whole lot of work. But I know 1,000,000% it's exactly what's supposed to be happening. And so, thank you for taking me to church today, Kels. I appreciate that.
My pleasure.